we'll record anyway, so we know what we're doing, and so that people will have a record of things as we get the session done. Now I'll just get some access again. Here we go. Okay, so we're talking about cross-curriculum priorities, and what I might do actually is I might hide our visuals so that we and I'll just hide the video panel so that we're not visible on the recording, and we'll just get going. Not that there's anything wrong with us being on the recording, but this way, at least, we won't be duplicating. So this week we're talking about the 3 cross-curriculum priorities, and we're kind of stepping up as we scale in to looking at the Paishakusha. So we're looking now at the topics, the 10 research topics, from a cross-curriculum perspective. So it's really important for us to take those into consideration, because one of the assessment criteria actually does ask us to look at least one of those three perspectives. And this week, I start the week off with a quote from Noel Pearson. Now, last year, Noel came out in a huge critique of the education system. There was a big issue, of course, up in Aurukun, and a school was closed down. And Noel came out and spoke quite heavily and quite strongly against the education system in Queensland, and said that it's failing Aboriginal students, and it fails them because of a culture that's grown on top of cultural differences. And his explanation was these very significant words: beware the soft bigotry of low expectations. And so we try to challenge that this week by looking at our cross-curriculum perspectives and seeing what they can actually offer us going forward. So, okay. Right. So, question for you. I mean, we talk about perspective. So, you're sitting in your chair at the moment. We're engaged in a Zoom. What's going on? Are you really sitting in your chair? Now, chances are you may look, and you look. I was at a cycle class the other day. I go to a gym, like many of you do, and we're in this cycle class, and we raised this discussion, about are you actually sitting on your cycle seat? And the reality was, of course, that no, you're actually sitting on this guy, and this is Anders Angstrom. Now, Angstrom is a Swedish physicist. As you can see by the date of clothing, he's dated. But he actually came up with the notion and of a measure that was named after him called an angstrom. And an angstrom basically is the length of an atom. So what is an atom? Okay, so you're no longer sitting on your chair. You are literally couch surfing. So there is no contact between your body and the chair. You're separated by what we call 100 picometers, or if you want 1/10 of a nanometer, or a centimetre to the -8, if you like, or a metre to the -10. So science has its own perspective. So science should be one of those subjects where it's really easy to sort of contemplate bringing in other perspectives. And that's what we're looking at this week, cross-curricular perspectives. We're looking at how science, the world in which it's sitting, is changing. And we also know that science has got its own ways of learning. And here's a little joke that comes out of science field too. There are only 0.00010 kinds of people in the world, those who understand binary and those who do not. So science is full of its own perspectives. It's got its own languages, it's got its own ways of knowing. So this week we're going to have a look at what it means to be involved in that way of knowing. So and then to open that way of knowing up to a little bit of diversity as to what's going to happen with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. So science, as a word, is only 120 years old. As a concept, it's not even that old. Prior to that, science really was philosophy. And philosophy was open to all kinds of questions and perspectives. So let's not assume that science goes back a long, long time. Science really needs to, in its future, and this is the big argument from the Australian curriculum, it needs to integrate with other ways of knowing. And so this week we're looking at Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander history and cultures, Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia, which again is a major issue, but doesn't appear much. And here's our little caveat. That's why we're not going to see it much in this week's work, and you won't see it much in your primary connections units. But really, Australia's engagement with Asia is one of the upper levels, up year 8, 9, 10 sort of levels of the ACS where it really comes in. And sustainability. We'll introduce you to a woman called Catherine Metz in week 9, and I'll talk about her a little bit today too. But she challenges the whole notion of sustainability as an impossible to teach concept. And she actually takes on the whole history of cognitive psychology and challenges the fact that, we cannot teach young people how to engage in these complex science understandings. So we're going to look at the 3 ways of being, and we're going to analyse the 3 cross-curriculum priorities presented and how they can be incorporated effectively into a science framework. So that's our goal for the week. A couple of the key terms that came through the reading as you're looking, and they're basically, you can see the 3 perspectives there. Diversity is the key theme, and Indigenous, something relating to a certain place or a certain region. So, just getting our concepts and definitions in place there. From the Moodle this week, what have we got? And what I've got here is a little way to look at, if you like, perspectives. Now, this one is a program run by the Australian Psychological Association called Kids Matter. And they raised the notion that, if Aboriginal and Indigenous kids are going to survive and thrive in our community, if they're going to have positive models, then we need to see positive models coming through curricula. And what I'll just do is I'll play this and I'll just ask if the volume doesn't come through, just let me know, because sometimes Zoom does block out third-party volume and it may not play this from YouTube. But it's a cute little thing talking about perspective. Let's have a look at what perspective might mean from a learner's point of view. Oh. And see if we can actually get this to play. Nope. Okay. We're off.
No sound.
All right, we pause it there then. What I've done is I've put the videos, I've embedded them into the PowerPoint slideshow, which is online. So hopefully you can have a look at that and play that through yourself. But what it is essentially a young lad talking about his grandfather, Majumbo, and he takes the audience through the importance of family, connection, country, and sort of positive role models. And in doing so, we are very much trying to highlight what we mean by perspective. Why it is important to bring perspective into teaching and learning, because it's not really the way we look at our subject matter. We look at our subject matter from a subject position. What we need to do is step back and actually have a look at how the learner is looking at our subject. And this little exercise, done by the Australian Psychological Association, they created a whole resource geared towards empowering Indigenous people to step into mainstream cultures and institutions by bringing their culture with them through the door. So going on to that, we talk about Joe Sambono in the Moodle this week. I put up links to one of his online presentations. And for one of you, those of you doing the topic barriers to engagement, here you've got 4 barriers that Joe identifies for you. So, when you're looking at what may cause disengagement, obviously cultural distance. Small d discourses, as we know them, may cause a big disengagement factor. But Joe talks about embedding Indigenous perspective and putting them into resources. So we're actually on a shift here. We're on a shift from looking at Aboriginal and knowledges and Aboriginal ways of knowing as somehow second world, somehow third world relations to our own ways of knowing. We're shifting from that perspective to one of inclusivity. But as Noel Pearson says, beware the soft bigotry of including something and then dismissing it as silly or as childlike or as naive. Beware that soft bigotry. What Joe talks about in his presentation, what's really powerful, is bringing that into equal standing, bringing Indigenous perspectives into equal standing with our own Western understandings. And it's a theme that comes right through this week's Moodle. So he says, why do we embed Indigenous histories and cultures into a curriculum? And basically, it's a priority, and it is a priority, for all learners to deepen their knowledge of Australia by engaging with the world's oldest continuous living cultures. It's identified. Okay, 3 months ago, it has actually formally been carbon dated. The Aboriginal community are perhaps the oldest collective culture in the world. This knowledge and understanding will enrich their ability to participate positively. And some of the agendas for Indigenous people is reconciliation, is reconciling not only our ways of knowing, but all our ways of being. Positive identities. We saw that from the Australian Psychological Association in their little Kids Matter. Not just knowledge matters, not just science matters, but actually kids matter. Every kid at our table matters. Hidden histories, hidden facts. We know that knowledge is a contest. We know that the shelf life of knowledge is halving every 18 months. We know that what we know to be true will no longer be true. Knowledge will pass, and will pass very quickly. And when it does, none of us go looking for what was yesterday. I mean, we know that history is not so kosher. We know that history is not as sexy as science, for instance, in the subject streams. But STEM is the big new sexy thing. And it's all future-oriented. It's all market-oriented. It's all about economic futures. But there are some hidden stories. And hidden stories can actually enrich our lives. And of course, it leads to greater educational outcomes for Indigenous kids. And that's by knocking down some of those barriers. And here are some of those barriers that you may want to raise in your Peshakusha. There are many established educators are products of a system, and I'm one. And perhaps some of you are too, that has not acknowledged or taught Aboriginal and Indigenous Australians. Major knowledge gaps exist in our educators. They exist in us too, and we can't know it all. There's also subject snobbery when you get to year 11 and 12, for instance. It's chemistry, physics, gateways to university, high stakes knowledge. There's a lot of gatekeeping around who we want walking through our science institutions. And we certainly don't want them walking through telling alternate science stories. And we're still recovering from past mandates, okay? Cultural hangovers, which saw, cultural domination of one group over others, cultural domination of certain perspectives over others. And now we're seeing very much a world of scientific domination and elaboration and thinking. So why an Indigenous perspective? Okay, and why perspectives at all? Well, we know there's been a lot of debate about the Indigenous perspective. And it's gone from, for instance, educating about Aboriginal people to, as Noel Pearson would say, imposing a structure of soft bigotry above their knowledge systems. Ultimately now, where we're being asked with a crowbar to pry open our curriculum, to question our own content, and to challenge our own assumptions about what actually constitutes science knowledge. So we've accepted parallels. Okay, here is a parallel story of creation. Here is a parallel story of Tidlik the frog and the Great Flood. Now we know in Australia, geographically, we know, for instance, that just west of Cairns and Townsville used to be a huge inland sea. We know that. Of course, up at Richmond, we've got massive fossil beds which tend to indicate these sorts of global changes. But, again, these are not parallel perspectives. They are different ways of knowing about science. More education and awareness of knowledge will in time change erroneous views. Now, I have deliberately peppered the Moodle with Bruce, one of our great Indigenous elders, who is also a writer and also a scientist. Now, he gets up there and talks about how history, how society and politics has misunderstood Indigenous science. Okay, they were nomadic. Nonsense. You're calling Indigenous farmers nomadic just gave us right to say they owned no land and the land was free and allowed us an open avenue to come in and take it over. There is documented evidence now, Bruce Pascoe documents, where Indigenous farmers were very, very regionally based. They had massive farms and they moved from one sector of that farm as the seasons operated. So a different notion of farming, different notion of agriculture, different ways of viewing the world. And we're starting to see this now. We've gone from Aboriginal education of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island students to now we're looking at all Australians. And this is reflected in the ACS. We can see here right across our 3 strands. Okay, Indigenous perspectives are richly embedded. Okay, in many of the years. As you can see, science inquiry, it starts to kick off as students get a little bit earlier, but ultimately the early stages of the curriculum are all about ways of understanding and cultures and societies coming to terms with the challenge and the opportunities that science and science understandings present, human endeavours. Our next slide. In the Moodle this week, I introduced you to Chris Garner. And anybody got any comments on Chris, on his presentation? I've had some really good feedback about the work he's done. Anyone like to add anything at this point?
I'd really like to say that it's a shame that more people don't know about people like Chris Garner. I'm aware of Chris Sarah and the work he does up there, but this guy was so motivational and just gave me so much hope that there is people out there that do care.
Yeah, he's done very well for a Scotsman, hasn't he? He's been to South Africa, and I won't play any of his video here, but what I will do is I will promote it, because I didn't see a name come up there, sorry, because I've actually switched that off. Who was I speaking to there?
Oh, sorry, it's me, Sarah.
Sarah, thanks, Sarah, for that input. I mean, I tend to agree with you. It is quite a powerful presentation. And believe it or not, Chris has almost faded back into oblivion too. He's gone back to the work he does best. He doesn't really like to talk about it that much, but he felt obliged to step up and talk about an alternate way. And he does this, and he tells an amazing story. And it's as much our story. I mean, we can look at it and think it's actually about Indigenous perspectives. But he begins with this top box here. You know, the traditional way of looking at academic success is to say potential times effort equals success. So a kid comes from a working class background, an impoverished, what we call a small d discourse. They're distant from academic discourse, and they're pretty lazy. They're more into sports. Their chance of success is pretty low. Chris actually challenges that, and he challenges not only for Indigenous learners, but for everybody. He talks about potential times effort, plus this concept of learning being relevant to their own context. Now, context is the situation in which they live, they thrive, they breathe. It's their culture, their cultural context. That equals success. And in his presentation, and I would love to play it, but chances are the volume won't work. Zoom seems to just block out third-party volume. I don't know why. I think because it records my voice above anything else. So it's a bit limited. But it'd be nice to use bits of Chris's presentation here and talk about it. But what I'll have to do is just commit you to look at it and encourage you to look at it. But he says we are trapped in Western ideologies, that we believe it's about potential and effort equals success, but all we do is just we recreate ourselves. We limit the opportunities for potential candidates, potential learners. And this little cartoon captures it beautifully. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Now, we know the goldfish is going to have a difficult time doing that, okay? The seal may have a difficult time. The monkey may do a little better. But essentially, this is what Chris Garner says education does. And he's got some amazing quotes throughout his presentation. The first thing that strikes me is the curriculum we work with. We have set standards, and there is this fear that when we personalise the program for every student, that we will somehow lower the standards. What do you think of that comment? Do you as a teacher worry about lowering the standard if you start to teach inclusively?
Hi, it's Sarah. I don't think we will lower the standards. I think there's a big need out there to change things for some kids. Especially the kids who really struggle, and yet you can't put them on an ICP, but they're still struggling in a classroom, and they need to be taken back just that little bit to feel successful. And there's nothing there for them. Well, from what I've experienced anyway.
Look, there's very little. I agree with you. And we could step back and look at the whole culture of schooling. Now, there was a brilliant book written in the last 2 years called Quiet. Now, I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's essentially about the world from an introvert's perspective. Now, an introvert, by definition, is someone who gets their energy from the inside. In our schools, if you're not an extrovert, if you're not out there pushing boundaries, volunteering questions, playing around, being the teacher's pet, into all the sports teams, into all the debate teams, if you're not doing that, if you're an introvert and you prefer to stay within your own confines and energy structures, then you don't fit very well into school. School can be a difficult place for you. And so even when we look at our own culture of introversion versus extroversion, just one cultural dimension, we can see that our system has got problems. So we do need to change things, and we do need to change a lot of things. Chris presents one way of us going forward. He tells the story of context, and this is really important to the Paisha Kusha, which I'm leading to, because your Paisha Kusha is actually It's a story of context. You don't need to retell a whole unit. You don't need to retell the 5Es model. All you have to do is tell a story about how they connect around a particular topic. You have to tell the context of the topic and the model as they sit together. So in this case, Chris does a wonderful presentation where he talks about Indigenous kids. Here's the terrible statistic. We can see the gap there. It's almost 2 to 1. Okay, Indigenous kids stay at school much less frequently than non-Indigenous kids. When you start to introduce some curriculum that's relevant to their context, we see the gap closing. It's still not equal, but we see it closing. When we graduate year 12, here's that horrible statistic nationally. 32% of Indigenous kids actually graduate year 12, 71% of non-Indigenous. That is a huge gap. It widens, as you can see, as the school years increase. Graduate year 12, once we actually give them a curriculum that's relevant to their context, that's relevant to who they are, where they are, and what they're doing. And in the Northern Territory, let's face it, it's 6 times the size of the UK, the Northern Territory. So it's a massive challenge, distance-wise, for them to deliver this program. But have a look at the results. We're actually not only closing the gap, but context is the tool to social success. Okay, and this is what we're doing with our Paisha Kusha. Let's take a topic. Let's look at the context of that topic. Let's apply it to a particular unit and tell your story. And Chris does that very well today. There are parallels, certainly. Which brings us to the 8 ways of learning. Now, there are many different models for Indigenous learning around. I put this up as just one. And the reason why I put it there is because, again, we can see it's actually very much an inquiry-based approach. And we've essentially got 8 different pedagogies there. So we were analysing an Indigenous curriculum. Okay, there we've got our unit, our 5Es. Now we've got our 8 pedagogies. And we can see the community links. Okay, it's very important to have that social context. Chris talks about this. I'm not going to repeat it. Deconstruct, reconstruct. Now, we know this as explicit instruction. Now, I do, we do, you do. Okay, it's pretty much become that. And of course, it's been pioneered by a guy down in North Melbourne. It's been adopted by Noel Pearson up in the Cape. It's become, a really, really strong, dominant way of delivering curriculum in mainstream schools right across Queensland, in state schools. But believe it or not, it's not adopted as much in Catholic schools, and certainly not in independent schools, who tend to stick to their more traditional models. It's non-linear. It's very organic, the curriculum. Okay, we've got cosmology matters as much as environment, matters as much as land, matters as much as content, and of course people are critical to that as well. Land links are essential, symbols and images. It's non-verbal. It's learning by doing, learning by knowing, learning by ritual. There are a lot of learning maps in the community, and in fact the land, the community, the totems are some of these. And of course, we get into story sharing, which is a critical part of the oral culture and of oral ways of learning. Now, we know from our work in science, and we know from looking at the Moodle and a range of other resources, that oral culture has sustained scientific knowing for centuries. We know that the Aboriginal community are the oldest astronomers in the world. There is nothing wrong with the 8 ways of learning. They hold up culturally and scientifically quite well. Okay, it just doesn't matter that Orion's belt was actually known as the emu story. Entirely different story. Same story, same principle, and same purpose. Okay, it gave us the navigational skills. It gave the Indigenous explorers the navigational skills to move around the country and farm and live and survive as a community. So the questions that Chris asks, why is it that we want to treat all students fairly? Why do we assess them on the exact same activities? Why do we impose the same expectations on every child? What if we could simply make schooling relevant to every kid in the class? If we could design activities that made sense to their real life? Now, what we know about brain-based science says that we are heading this way. We talked a little bit about this last week, and people said, what the hell is he throwing a picture of a brain for? Okay, because inquiry learning is actually geared directly towards what we know about brain science, about creating teachable moments. Now, if we can do this with Indigenous kids within their own context of learning, why can't we do it with all kids? What we know about brains, we should be heading to a project-based curriculum where a teacher can sit down at the beginning of the year and map out an entire interest-based curriculum for a student which includes integrated literacy, integrated numeracy, primarily in an ICT framework. It could be, a really, really rich integrated unit of learning. Instead, we limit them to a certain age, to a certain subject, and then we impose over that, cross-curriculum priorities, saying, oh, by the way, teacher, bring in this, bring in that, bring in this. In reality, the child is already bringing it into their own life, and hence disengagement is a big issue in our culture at the moment, in our culture of schooling and learning. And have a look at it. I mean, what we know about the brain, it's a process called neural pruning, which I thought. Last week we talked about stimulus. And down here in the left-hand corner, we've got, the stimulus comes through the eye into the brain, and that's one way of, visual transmission. Down here, we've got an organic model of the brain, and the key factor in here is this little mushroom type shape in here called the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is like your rubbish bin. The best analogy is when you're working with some kids, or imagine yourself, you're at a nightclub, okay, and all of a sudden you see someone and you just think, wow, I've got to meet that person. And you walk up to them and you get chatting and you say, by the way, what's your phone number? And they tell you, chances are you will remember that phone number because your amygdala is saying, it's got its tongue out saying, yes, 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 please. So it's motivated. Your amygdala is saying, go. Then all of a sudden you meet someone who's not quite as attractive. It may be this other person's best friend, and you can't take your eyes off this other person. And the other person says to you, well, look, here's my number too. And of course, what's your chances of remembering that? Very, very low, because your amygdala basically is saying, not interested, tongue's back in, I'm really interested in that one. So the amygdala is like your garbage can, okay? And it's very apparent with learners. So what we have is an experiential world, experiential learning. If you followed ABC Science, you may have discovered that, or heard that we've discovered a new organ which is actually bigger than skin. So it's going to be interesting to see how that debate transpires. But we experience the world through our brain. It's the only body in our organ that's sculpted through our experiences. Although the organ in our body, that's sculpted through. I must challenge that because I put that up there thinking about organs. But a study in America recently, one generation of students who've been using computers, laptops, have actually their shoulder cuff rotation, how they can lift their shoulder above their arm, front and back, has actually dropped 25%. So the computer is actually shaping our bodies as well. So it's actually reducing human movement. So God knows what we will look like in 10,000 years as we interact with our world. But certainly already in one generation, because of hunched over computer use, we've actually lost in a generation of boys, and the study was on boys, 25% of shoulder movement. So it's a really, really interesting, in the UK they did night vision. Kids using computers have actually lost their night vision. So we're starting to see our environment shape our worlds. So it's use it or lose it. And our brain does that, storage and retrieval system. Use that phone number or you'll lose it. And so our brain is shaped by reinforcement through formative assessment. And believe it or not, reinforcement starts as a protein bump on a myelin sheath. That protein bump gets reinforced, okay? The more times you actually assess and reward it through formative assessment process, the protein bump eventually grows into its own sheath and creates a new learning connection. It's literally that organic. And the brain builds over time. And then it prunes out its excessive growth. So it does this 3 times in a lifetime. So again, this is a little bit about what we know about mental illness and a little bit about we know about miswiring, if you like, in certain brains. 3 times in our lives, our brain actually sprints ahead of us. And it lays down all of these neural pathways. And then it has to trim them because it realizes not all of them are being used. And that's what we call neural pruning. The first time this happens is around about 1 to 2 years old, when we gain language. Because up till then, we were very visual. Often, when we dream, sometimes we dream visually because we have no words for that dream. Okay? Once we acquire language, we start to dispense with that part of our brain. It starts to break down and new pathways start to form. That happens at 1 to 2 with language. Around about the time we become or prepubescent, that's the second big brain dump we have in our lives. Our brain gets rid of a lot of those prepubescent thought patterns and pathways and starts to form new ones. And we know why. We're moving into childbirth age. We're moving into fascination. We're discovering, there's a different sex on the planet or there's a same sex on the planet, wherever our orientation is. It doesn't matter. The point is our brain is going haywire at this point in time. So it starts to have a huge dumper. It gets rid of its prepubescent brain and starts to prepare for its adolescent one. And the third time, it's speculated, this isn't proven yet, but around about 45 to 50, and hence the notion of a mid-year crisis, a midlife crisis, we actually have our third brain dump in our lifetime, where our brain basically sheds its parental and its work and its first adulthood brain, and starts to prepare into its second adulthood brain, which involves obviously older age and different activities. So our brain is an incredible thing, and our environment is incredibly stimulating. So when we talk about inquiry learning, we are talk about creating teachable moments. And as Chris said, why can't culture be part of that? Why can't it be a key determinant within that structure? So constructivist note for teachers, and often we see teachers doing really excited lessons, and this is something to check yourself on as you're doing your prac. You may be the most engaged person in that lesson. And if you're the teacher and you're interacting with that material, then yeah, it's good for your brain, but it's not really so good for the brains of the students in your class. So when we look at the Paishakusha, when we look at inquiry-based learning, we're talking about process-driven lessons, authentic examples, real context, the sorts of things Chris talks about in his presentation, real Indigenous contexts. Moving from the concrete to the abstract, direct instruction, access to information, formative assessment, a big way in which we shape behaviour. And once we shape behaviour, we plant protein dumps. Once we plant protein dumps, we're growing neural pathways, and we're starting to reinforce those pathways, making them a habit, making them part of the learner's behaviours. And again, just to finish off that story, it's a fantastic story, and it's a great presentation. And this is the power of a really good constructivist context. And this is really what you're doing with your Paishakusha. You're looking at a constructivist context, a unit of study. What is trying to be constructed there? By whom? How? Sustainability. Let's move on briefly and talk about that. We don't want to talk too much about this. It's all in the Moodle, but really just the focus on sustainability is for a priority of study, and it connects and relates to relevant aspects of content across the learning areas and subjects of the curriculum. So it's about understanding the way social, economic and environmental systems interact to support and maintain human life, appreciating and respecting diversity of views and values that influence sustainable development. And we can strongly see here, can't we, the Indigenous, the first priority coming through, and also the Australian Asia, the regional priority coming through. What's good for Australia may not be good for Asia. The Adani mine, for instance. Okay, economically good for Australia, environmentally bad for our Australian system. Okay, Asia wasn't a big fan of the whole thing. Okay, and chances are the Adani company are now winding up the entire proposal. So it's interesting to see how systems, are influenced around this theme of development. Participating critically and acting creatively in determining more sustainable ways of life. So this is what we talk about when we talk about sustainability. And again, the reason I raise this is because not a lot of people, and the research will point to in a second, not a lot of teachers actually get education for sustainability. The reason I love the Indigenous perspective is because within Indigenous, within the dreaming, there are the monsters of unsustainability. There is somebody, a creature, a being who does something that threatens the well-being of the community in a lot of myth stories and a lot of Dreamtime stories. And in doing so, they become the monsters of unsustainability. The rest of the community has to do something, has to determine an action to right the actions of the monster, to correct it, to put sustainability back in balance. And that's why I love those stories. And that's why I agree with Catherine Metz that kids of any age can learn about sustainability. It's not that complex if we really break it down and work with the context of the learner. So when we look at this one, sustainability is concerned with ongoing capacity to maintain life. And a couple of themes that came out of it, authentic context, investigating relationships, appreciation for interconnectedness, observation and analytical skills, really important. And of course, the final stage, action stage. Sustainability requires action to design solutions. And some of the ways of being here, envisioning a better future, systemic thinking, reflexive thinking, and participation in decision making. So there are not a lot of teachers teaching that way. And this slide takes us through that. Okay, this comes from a research project. I can't actually remember, it's on the Moodle, but actually I just hooked into this slide today thinking this is really worth plucking out and sharing with you. But we can see that 80% of teachers don't actually comprehensively understand education for sustainability. They're either unaware of it or they just don't get it. And that leaves 20%, 1 in 5, who actually know what this priority is all about, actually know how to teach it, how to integrate it. When they pick up a primary connections unit, knowing where it is and how to bring it out and bring it to the learner in ways, and then teach it, get those neural pathways flowing so that kids can actually question and make their own minds up about what they think. So 40% lack awareness, 40% lack comprehension, don't understand it. 9% lack knowledge of how and where to integrate it, so they have no idea what to do once they've got it. 2% not teaching sustainability or meeting the ACARA guidelines directly, just avoiding it. 7% integration of compliance, so they're doing what they have to do, they're doing the minimum. So they may do, for instance, an 8-week science lesson, and they may do 30 minutes on sustainability. Write this down, this is what sustainability is. Okay, so it's hardly going to achieve its purpose. And of course, 2% are actually doing engaged sustainability practices in their classroom. Some great schools, New South Wales, believe it or not, they've got a chicken coop program. Isn't that amazing? A chicken coop program. We've seen in some of the Moodle activities, you'll look at it weeks 8, 9, 10, and 11, gardens, school gardens, fabulous strategies. All of these things that schools can do that don't require a lot of technology, don't require a lot of expenditure, but really address and implement this engaged sustainability focus. So it's really worth looking at sustainability this week and looking at how it comes through in science and teaching. Now, oh yes, I won't play this one again. Chances are once Tiddalik boots up. But you'll see that there's the YouTube link to it. And it's a fabulous little story from the Dreaming about the Great Flood. And it really is, when we talk about young children, it's very hard to talk about predictive modelling and scenario building. Some of these really complex STEM ideas that get thrown around at conferences. But I think if you watch Tiddalik the Frog, I think it does it beautifully. There's a lot of scenario building. There's a lot of eliciting of futures. There's a lot of predictive modelling. Have a good look at it, see what you think. And it's all done, believe it or not, within a Dreamtime story. Okay? And again, the beauty of those stories is they're a tool for sustainability, because one reasonably quick and easy, I call them stories, and these perspectives, okay? An easy approach to imagine desired future is that of utopia. So there is this perfect world, and Tiddalik starts that way with a perfect world until Tiddalik the Frog drinks all the water. And then they have to make him laugh so he can give back the water and help the environment recover. And of course, you can see the learning here in this story about the importance of water to land and to culture and community. So it's a perfect world. Everyone lives in harmony until they don't. And in this case, until Tiddalik drinks the water. Okay, then we need the flood, and the flood restores joy to the land and brings life back to balance. Sustainability. All right, I'm going to talk about the forums this week. Anyone got a question before we start? Question or comment from the forums? Okay, let's have video settings. Sarah's on board. Who else is here? Oh, we've got a couple of people there. Loretta, anything from the forum that you were particularly interested in this week?
Colin, it's Sarah. I'm still really confused about the assessment task, but I'm going to go back through. I quickly had a glance at the forums and saw that other people are having the same problem, and you've responded to them. So tomorrow I'm got the day off, so I'm going to just go back through it and just see if I can pick bits and pieces out of there. Fabulous.
Any questions, shoot them through, Sarah, on email or on the forum, and we can push things through further. Alexia did a really, I thought it was a great post. I was really grateful to her for having the honesty to come out and saying, I just don't know how I'm going to fit it all in. Great question. And so I'll talk about the response to that in a minute. The aim is you don't try to fit it all in, so we'll talk about the strategy for that. Noelle was looking for the library of PC units. Hopefully she found that. We've written back to her, and hopefully that's the case. Fiona's got some good stuff there on tackling the 5 E's. And writing back to her, I actually say to Fiona that less is more. It's really important, if she can, to do less in her Paishakusha than to try and do more, which is the great temptation, is to try and fit everything in. And reality is the assessment task was not designed that way, so you're not meant to fit everything in. It's all about context. As Chris Rain said in his presentation this week, it's about working out what your context is and writing to it. Paul is doing the Indigenous perspectives topic, Carly sustainability. Kate and Kayla have got some good discussions going with engagement. If you're doing any of those topics, jump in and look for those names. Contribute and give back and extend the thinking. The importance of signposting your topic. This has come up in a few questions from people. Birgit, Alexia and Paula in the Q&A forum. And someone actually mailed me through their first 5 slides, which were fantastic. The content was fabulous. The only question is, at the end of the 5th slide, I didn't actually know what topic the person was doing. So as a marker, and I'll talk about this in a minute, it is really important that you define your topic in your first 3 slides, that you tell us what it is you're doing, what topic, why you're doing it, and why it matters. Really, and once you've done that, you then include what you want to include.
Colin, it's actually me who sent you, the Maxine who sent you the 5 slides, and I was reading the email today, and actually I get it now, so I'm going to go and fix it again.
Fabulous. Look, great. And as I said, content, fantastic. But the only thing I was left at the end of 5th slide thinking, oh, what topic is this? And as a marker, if you haven't got me on board from the start, then chances are at the end, you won't have me on board. So I need to know what your topic is. So come out and say, this Paishakusha is exploring this topic. Why is it doing that? Because this is important for this reason. And I'll talk about referencing in the next couple of slides. So it's really important you come out and you take control. You tell us what you're going to tell us, because Alexia is right. You could go on for 3 nights and 3 days, 40 days and 40 nights if you wanted. You could really sustain this presentation over a very long period of time, but guess what? You've got 6 minutes. So strip it down. Be strategically negligent. And in my response to Alexia, I give her 6 steps, for approaching that. And it's great to feel nervous and panicky about it. That means you care. That's a really good sign. But as I say in my response, it's also part of the primitive brain, so it's not going to help you deal with complex issues. So get rid of it. Have your panic and then move on and sort of say, all right, here's me doing what I need to do. So signpost that topic. Get your marker on the same page as you from the first, second or third slide, so they know what your topic is, why you're doing it, and why the hell it's important. Now, of course, they know why it's important, but they want to know that you know. Remember, this is your display. This is your little brag box. This is your lunchbox. You're opening your lunchbox to everyone sort of saying, this is what I've got. So tell us what you're going to do. Really important that the Paishakusha is nailed in those first 3 slides. And then all you do is you follow through and pick up what you say you're going to talk about. You don't, if there's a wonderful lesson in the third E of this particular unit on stars, forget it if it's not relevant. Okay? It doesn't matter to your presentation. So what you do is you pluck out the things that do matter, you tell us why they matter, and you tell us how that contributes to better learning outcomes, for students, what those better outcomes look like and why they're better outcomes. Okay? So that's the sort of thing we're talking about. Alison in Week 4 Forum, thank you for putting up your Human Endeavour link and discussion. It is really well done and really well conceived. So I can see that story fitting beautifully in that context, which you've actually brought it up and raised it. If anyone hasn't been there yet, have a look at Alison's post, and then also have a look at the final task in Week 4, because it's actually preparing you to start to look at the Paishakusha in some depth, because you do need to include your cross-curriculum perspectives, and the final task on the ebook for the week actually gives you a really good way to do that. So jump in there and have a look. Making it, trying to fit it all in, and this is the one thing I just want to talk about briefly. Forget past assignments. The Paishakusha is quite different. So move into the now with this one. Don't think that what you've repeated in the past that you can actually repeat. Clearly, you're going to take some things you've done in the past and apply them to this context. But remember, you're learning in a particular context. The Paishakusha is a very distinct context, and that's why this week is such a good week to discuss this. At the moment, your topic is undefined. And this is what I say to Alexia, and it's an uncomfortable place to sit. It really is. And that's a good assessment task, one that can make you feel uncomfortable. And then in order to get comfortable, you actually have to get in touch with your own knowledge and understanding. You know, you've got to talk your way out of this. So commit to a strategy. Now, what topic interests you from the 10 listed? What unit is relevant to your learners? Okay, and you'll know that because you probably may have a school you're going to you know about, or you may be in a school currently. Work out what your sandpit is and then just jump in, you know, and commit to jumping in. And once you do that, separate content from context. There's 100 pages of content in that unit. You can't deal with all of that. Don't try. Select the context. What is my topic? My topic is going to become my story. Okay? That's the context in which I'm going to discuss parts of the unit. A specific topic. It may be sustainability. It may be engagement. It may be Indigenous perspectives. It may be ICT. And classroom strategies and pedagogies. What do they look like and how does that work in that unit of study? So create the context. Tell us about the context. Know the unit, and from that unit, pick out the bits that you think are going to tell this story. And you do this, diffuse your uncertainty. Define your topic. You've got 20 by 20. The early slides, as I said, should tell the marker what your story is going to be and why it's worth telling. And it can be as blunt as, this Peshakusha will examine engagement. These theorists argue that engagement is essential to learning for the following reasons. Bang, off you go. The unit I'm focusing on is this. The elaborations are these, okay? And the strands I'm going to explore are these. The class level is this, okay? Go berserk. From that point, you're free to tell us what you're going to tell us about your topic once you've defined it and shared it with us. And then finally, acceptance. Trust that you've covered your bases, that your story is worth telling. And, on the Moodle, I say check with peers, run it by. Get on the Moodle and sort of say, this is what I'm doing. Anybody got any advice? I've seen some great advice. I mean, you're all teachers in training. So there's some really good advice coming through for each other, really good perspectives to use our topic. Any questions about the forums before I move on, or anybody want to raise anything else? In 2 weeks' time, you'll really be sharpening your pens around this one because it will be due in the non-teaching week. So I do expect the forums to start to get a little bit busier, and it's really important that they do, because start sharing, because you are all teachers in training. Here is the chance for you to have some high impact, high impact output in someone else.
This is Maxine again. I was wondering, are you available on the non-teaching week, like if we want to email you for some help or if we get stuck?
Yeah, call me. Call me if you like. I'll put out a series of hours where I'm in my office and by my phone, so people can call, or they can just bang on the Moodle or email or whatever. Yeah, I'll put out some hours saying, look, I am definitely sitting beside my phone at these times.
Okay, thank you.
No problems at all. So look at this, the fifth and final assessment task, assessment criteria. It's about supporting evidence. And you can see all of the criteria talk about authoritative sources. So what the hell is an authoritative source? Okay, the first one, for instance, talks about, the green one defines what the criteria is. Clear and concise Peshakusha 2020 presentation. So 20 slides by 20 minutes, by 20 seconds, sorry. And then you're allowed to have as many reference slides as you want. Okay, so 2020, you don't need to include references in your slides. Using authoritative sources to justify and explain approaches to science teaching that promote learning and enjoyment. So, okay, now in the section down below here, this assessment criteria calls for supporting evidence to back your analysis. Do not make the mistake of not referencing your ideas in the Peshakusha. And I say to you, this is the barroom equivalent of standing alone and facing a branch of the Hells Angels in a sleazy downtown bar. It could be the Comancheros, it could be, anybody nasty. Your markers can be worse than Hells Angels. So in your Peshakusha, if you're coming out talking about engagement, define it. Engagement is a good thing. Says who? Bring a gang of your friends to this rumble. Do not turn up alone. Don't bring your macrame club. We don't want to see Gregson there. We don't. What you need here are all the big hitters. Some seasoned brothers and sisters from the street gang of constructivist teaching. So you've got to come out here. And, if you're going to avoid sliding down that scale of assessment there. If you want to be up in the 6 and 5, you've got to have references that are going to support your evidence. Now, so I know you're sitting at the moment thinking, scratching your head, thinking, oh, God, where am I going to find those? Well, don't worry. I've got about 3 slides full of people that you could consult in a minute. I won't go through them all, but I just wanted to put them up here and put them on the slideshow so you've got them, and then you can go out and have a look. So who's going to be the Jackie Chan of student learning, the Jennifer Lawrence of assessment, the Terminator of inquiry learning? Who's going to stand beside you when you take on your gang of markers? You've got to work that out. You've got to give that some thought. You don't need copious references, but when you're talking about theory and pedagogy, you've got to locate yourself. You've got to point to your tribe and your tree. This is the tree I sit in. This is the tree I'm arguing from. And then your marker will just sit there and say, yeah, well, I get that. But if you're saying the stuff and you're not pointing to your gang of friends, you're pointing to your macrame club instead and saying, oh, Gregson says this. Well, you think, well, Gregson says a hell of a lot, but it's really not informed. It's all just borrowed. So what do you think? Tell me why you're using this, really, come on. And all of a sudden your marker's getting really narky, and there's a bit of a rumble coming. So you've got to be really careful, Bring your gang of friends. Work out who your tree is, who your tribe is, and speak from that place when you do this Peshakusha. Okay, the worst thing you can do is leave that open to conjecture or not to do it at all, because you'll get the comment, this is a general discussion. This discussion is not defined. This is not supported by evidence. Okay, support it. Bring your friends. Okay? Identify who they are and bring them, and get ready for that intellectual rumble. So when we look at it, I've got a few topics here and a few people. Some of these will be hard to find, but really I'm talking about names. Jump into the databases and search for people like Anderson. Does some great stuff on reforming science teaching. Look at the date. You can see Anderson was a pioneer and one of those teachers that actually brought about the change that you as pre-service teachers are now picking up as normal practice. The Primary Connections website has got some good stuff. Bransford, Brown and Cocking, great stuff. Again, look at the date, a little bit old. Okay, but I like it because it links brain, mind and school. Again, can be hard to find because it's an American one. Dennis Goodrum does some good ones. Okay. Dawson, Llewellyn, the National Research Council, again, a little bit old, potentially. And Tytler, Russell Tytler, does some great stuff too on constructivist teaching. And also has written a lot more recent articles. That's why I'm actually throwing up some names here. I don't want to give you the articles, but I actually want to point you to the people who are writing them and the people who are definitely worth quoting, or just drawing on your 4 or 5 people you want to have in your corner, putting them together and knowing where they stand and how they support your arguments. Persons of interest for inquiry teaching, Rennie, Tytler, I've got in there again. Harlan. Harlan comes out of WA. If you see anything with his name on it, he actually specialises in science inquiry processes and investigations. Great stuff. Budolf comes out of the 80s, 90s, so very old, but led the New Zealand push into predict, observe, explain into their 5Es model, which is really just the POE. Bybee, as you can see, Bybee's published in 2015 again. He published in 97, he published in 99, he published with a group of people in 97. He then refined his model a little bit on his own in 99, and now in 2015 it's become a sequence. It's no longer a model, it's no longer the 5Es model. So he keeps reinventing himself, but not much has changed. But Bybee's in there too. Have a good look. John Lemke, a great theorist, looks at socio-cultural constructivism and may be interesting to those of you looking at Indigenous perspectives. Mark Prensky, if you're doing ICTs and digital natives, digital immigrants, can't recommend Prensky work high enough. 2001 was a really good paper, but he's written right through. Catherine Metz probably started publishing about 96, is still going. Her most recent work is in encyclopedias of teaching, so they're a bit harder to get, but some of her earlier articles are brilliant. She's a thought leader and she takes on conventional arguments about child development. So these are really good people who will help you, stand behind you and help you face down the Comancheros, of marking. So they're really good. Assessment is another area where you may want to look. I've got Bell and Cowie. If you see anything from Cowie, it's good. Cowie's done a lot of work between 2009 2015 on new stuff, and is brilliant. Black and William wrote the Inside the Black Box, of course, which is a seminal paper. Black and William have done quite a few bits since. They've stopped publishing more recently, but some of their older stuff is good, but it's very long. So I'd say, yeah, they're great. If you can get a summary of them, good. Dennis Goodrum, again, with Rennie and Hackling on his own. Harlan, again, pops up in assessment, particularly the 1990 paper. I really liked it, if you can get a hold of it. And John Hattie. Has been very influential in Australian government in shaping educational policy. And he came up with the notion of visible learning. So he's very much about forcing the teacher to view the learner and understand how the learner actually learns. So you can see the power of Hattie there in assessment. Okay, and persons of interest in assessment, I thought I'd throw in McKinley. McKinley publishes a lot about Indigenous learners, very topical and excellent for inclusive teaching. And Russell Titler again comes up really well here in linking science teaching to assessment. So he does that brilliantly in many of his papers and explores different ideas there. So you only need to read 4 or 5 of these people. You only need to assemble them and work out whether they're in your tribe. If they're in your tribe, why are they in your tribe? What do they advocate? And you'll find they've got a lot of common interests. But by and large, when you step into the Paisha Kucha, don't stand there alone. Have your gang with you. The final one I talk about is student learning. As you see, quite a few of the same names come up. Bybee, there's his 97 to 15. Marshall is good. The 4E2 instructional model. And again, you should be able to get that one too, because it's in the Journal of Science Teacher Education, which CQ subscribe to. Slavin is very, very good on cooperative learning. Very good. Bit dated, but very, very good. And Venville and Dawson, unfortunately, it's a textbook, but in that textbook are chapters by many of the authors that I've actually cited for you today. So some of them are going to be hard to get. Don't be too disappointed. Go for the names more than the actual texts themselves. So when you're looking at student learning, Titler, Hackling, Goodrum and Hattie. And they're people that come through. So if you're looking for a reference and someone to read, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to send you into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. Here are some people that you may want to look at and consider. Questions or comments? This is my last slide.
Holland,
Loretta, fire away.
how are you looking for us to incorporate this? For argument's sake, if we, I'm leaning definitely to making science real in the classroom.
Yes.
That's number 9. So for argument's sake, where it will be visible hands-on learning, so I would definitely look at Hattie.
Yes.
Are you wanting me to refer to Hattie when I'm discussing certain elements within my education?
Yeah. Look, the only reference you'll need to make to Hattie is, and he may, for instance, have a quote that you really, really like, that you think works beautifully at a particular point. By all means, throw that in. And you can either speak that and just have Hattie in brackets with the date and the page number on your Paisha Kucha.
Okay.
Yeah, so you are free to include it in whatever way you want. But by and large, when you're making pedagogical choices, when you're pointing, for instance, to you may look, for instance, inquiry-based learning is an exceptionally powerful pedagogy. This has been discussed by Hattie, Goodrum, Hackling, okay? And the consensus, the point of view they share around this is this. And then, in your references, of course, they'll come up as people who've contributed to your argument. So you can either speak the references or you can embed them in text on your presentation.
My understanding from the actual slides is that there must be very little content on the slides, maybe just a picture, and I'm going to talk around which will relate to what I'm speaking, which I've worked out is about 40 words. I'm looking at around about 40 words a slide.
Okay, well, you've obviously timed yourself, and that's a great way to do it. It's a great way to do it, yeah. And so you may think, for instance, you may talk in your 40 words per slide, and you may have certain ones that you want the marker to remember. And they're the ones that you may flash up on the screen. You can either put them up as part of the presentation as an animation to go up for 3 or 4 seconds and then fade. And then, in this way, you're actually getting your message across at so many levels, and you're using the power of the presentation to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Laura. A very good question.
Colin, this is Maxine. I just want to make sure you said that the assessment is in our off with non-teaching week. It's actually the week after. It's on the 19th. Have I got it wrong of April?
Oh, you may have it right. I just rolled that out, thinking that's what. Is it in week 6? Is it? It's due in week 6.
Yes. That's what it says on Moodle, and I just went, oh my goodness, a week earlier. I can't do that.
Okay, well, I've just given several people heart attacks then. My apologies. Go with what's on the Moodle. Maybe I'm thinking of a different subject. Week 6 it's due. Yep, thank you. Then go with that. That is the date.
That's better. I was like, panic attack. I was like, oh my goodness. Okay.
Sorry, Maxine. I've done that once before, actually, and believe it or not, in student feedback, it was the one thing everyone focused on. You mucked up the date. No, I didn't muck up the date. I just got confused. I'm getting old. Okay. Any other questions? My apologies for that one. It is week 6.
Well, it's Rosalind here. I'm just wondering, I haven't Googled it, so I'm being a bit lazy in asking this question, but do Bruce Pascoe and Fran Bodkin have any work that's been published?
Bruce Pascoe does. I know he's written at least 2 books.
Yep.
And he's actually written quite a few science papers too. He's actually into agriculture now, or he's got another name for it, Indigenous agriculture he calls it. And he's actually working with groups down in Victoria to bring back original Indigenous plants.
Yes. He talked about the Indigenous systems that are exportable to the world in his some of that stuff that was on Moodle this week. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's very much into agriculture and I guess that Indigenous perspective on agriculture too, and replenishing the lands and using that sustainability focus. So he's he's definitely got publications out there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. Any other questions or comments? If there's not, I will hit the record.
Another one, Colin.
Loretta, fire away.
Sorry. I'm just going through your tips of construction of the Pecha Kucha.
Yes.
And you do state here that the cover page with your details and chosen topic can be part of your 20 or in addition.
Yep.
I'm just trying to get my head around this because obviously I would want a cover page, but that I would deem as not being part of my actual speaking part or my presentation part. That's just going to be the cover.
Lovely. Look, I'm sure your marker would welcome that. That's it's a nice idea because when you're shifting between Pecha Kuchas and you're marking these, you really like to know, take the time to pause them and actually work out who's doing the presentation, what the topic is, and if you put that up front. Even if you wanted to put a little bit of think music for the marker and then start the presentation, you're able to do that.
Okay, so then we're not looking at whatever it is, 6 minute 40 or whatever. It's probably going to be more 7 minutes.
Yes. I mean, your 2020 is what matters here. So, some people go up to 5 and 6 slides of references, which, is leaving yourself open to criticism because if those references don't appear to contribute to your presentation, then you're blowing wind up people, in other words, which is not a good thing to do. Show respect to markers, include the relevant ones, bring your tribe with you, display them thoroughly and enjoy displaying them, and then speak from that position of strength, but don't just throw references down for the hell of it.
And any embedded pictures we need to reference as well?
Yes, they will appear in the reference pages too.
Okay.
Yeah, some people like to take their own, including of their own children. These are not public domain documents, so they will not be released public domain. So, without your permission, if is an excellent example, of course. But so some people like to use their own children and take their own photos. other people are happy to surf the web and look in archives and collect things that way.
Okay.
And curate their own images, as we'll come to discuss in week 8, 9 and 10. All right, if there's no further questions, I'll get this recorded and get it onto YouTube for the remainder of the class who can't be here. Thank you for your continued patronage of these sessions, and your questions and input do actually make them so much worthwhile for me, because otherwise I'm sitting here talking to a screen, and I really do appreciate knowing that there are people on the other side. Thank you. And good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.